Melania Trump entered like royalty, mocking Jasmine Crockett as low IQ. Laughter followed until Jasmine revealed files of fake degrees and a stolen scholarship. The room turned, Melania froze. Jasmine flipped the script. Would Melania's mask crack, or would Jasmine pay for speaking truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blazing lights of the congressional hearing room, the words empower her foundation. Inspiring girls. Worldwide glowed in gold behind the table, looking more like a brand ad than real charity. The double doors opened. Melania Trump walked in slowly, her heels almost silent, each step staged for the cameras. She wore a bone-white designer suit that fit her like it had been sewn by angels. Her hair was perfect, her smile exact. She raised her hand in a soft, trained wave, not to greet, but to command. Cameras flashed, phones clicked. She moved through the room as if she owned it, as if the hearing was her stage and the audience her court. She took the center seat beneath the banner, crossed one leg with flawless grace. She didn't look left or right. She didn't need to. 3 minutes later, the door opened again. Jasmine Crockett walked in. No cameras flashed, no applause. Her stride was calm, steady, sharp, like a prosecutor entering hostile ground. She wore no polished makeup, no designer glow. Just a dark navy suit, a firm expression, and silence. When she reached her desk, she greeted no one. Not the chairman, not Melania, not the press. From her leather folder, she drew out a plain, white-sealed envelope. No logo, no mark, no words. She set it down in the middle of her desk, slow, deliberate, like placing a weapon. Then she sat. No smile, no whisper. The room froze. Not from respect, but from pressure. Because everyone could see it, Jasmine hadn't come just to speak. She came to expose. The chairman's gavel tapped once, light routine, but it sounded like the start of an explosion. The room froze. Tension didn't just hang. It cut through the air like wire. Jasmine sat still, the sealed envelope untouched but glaring, a silent threat against the polished wood. Every camera locked in. Every aide, senator, and reporter stopped pretending to shuffle or type. They waited. Melania Trump didn't speak right away. She adjusted her cuffs, smoothed an invisible crease, squared her shoulders under the gold logo glowing behind her. Then she leaned into the microphone, not because she needed to, but because it looked right. I believe intelligence, she began, her voice smooth enough to sound trustworthy, is not about volume. Her tone wasn't soft from kindness, but sharp like a blade. It is about achievement. It is about how a woman carries herself with grace, with purpose. Each word landed calm and polished, yet underneath was a quiet edge, superiority, without needing to shout. She spoke like someone always heard, never challenged. Her eyes scanned the room, then locked on Jasmine Crockett, steady as a rifle scope. The pause that followed was no slip. It was power. I went to a real university, Melania said, lips bending into a faint smile. The line lingered before she cut deeper. Unlike certain women of color who only know how to make noise when no one chooses them. The blow sucked the air out. Journalists stared in shock. A gasp broke from the second row. Staffers stiffened. The chairman buried his eyes in his notes. No one stopped her. Everyone knew it wasn't a slip. It was aimed fire. Jasmine didn't move. Her eyes didn't narrow. Her hand stayed resting on the envelope like guarding a loaded truth. Her silence was sharper than any comeback. From the Republican side, Lauren Boebert bit back a laugh. Marjorie Taylor Greene whispered something that sparked another giggle. Their eyes stayed on Jasmine, celebrating the hit. But Jasmine stayed quiet. Because when you know the truth is coming, there's no rush. You wait for the silence to tighten. You wait for the mask to crack. And you wait for the cameras to record it. The silence didn't fade, it thickened, heavy and hostile. The room itself seemed to shift. Aides leaned forward, not to take notes, but to watch. Some glanced at Jasmine, expecting her to fire back. But she didn't. Her stillness was precision. Melania, fed by the quiet, leaned in again, sliding her gold bracelet up her wrist like part of the act. Some women, she said, her tone still silky, especially those who have become famous lately, are skilled at putting on a show for television. She spoke with lips barely parting, guarding her lipstick more than the cruelty in her words. But that is not intelligence. That is theater. Her intent was clear. This wasn't subtle, it was a strike wrapped in elegance. Her stare never left Jasmine. The message, "Your noise, not intellect. Style, not substance." The room felt smaller, tighter. Jasmine's eyes stayed steady. Then Melania dropped it like a final hammer before the crash. "Low IQ," she said. Cold, flat, without regret. A sentence, not an opinion. She let it sit, let the sting spread before adding, with cutting calm, "I'm sorry, but we must face the truth. I went to real school. I took real exams. I am not here to play." Her voice no longer pretended to be elegant. It had sharpened into something surgical, cutting through political etiquette with the ease of someone who believed herself untouchable. Reporters in the gallery exchanged glances, stunned at the bluntness. The Republicans on the panel smiled behind clenched jaws. Lauren Boebert even let out a low, knowing laugh, nudging the table with the back of her knuckle. But Jasmine didn't respond, not with a word, not with a breath. She merely tilted her head slightly to the right as though examining a portrait she had seen before. Then, with the calm of someone measuring the timing of a detonation, she extended one finger and tapped gently, deliberately on the sealed envelope in front of her. No one missed it. The room had heard a slur. Now it had seen a signal. And though Melania had just attempted to humiliate her opponent, she hadn't broken her. What she had done without realizing it was set the stage for her own unraveling. The insult still lingered in the air like smoke from a just-fired gun. Cameras stayed locked. Lawmakers barely blinked. Jasmine's fingertips still rested gently on the envelope in front of her, unmoved, unshaken. But across the dais, Melania Trump mistook that silence for surrender. And in that fatal miscalculation, she decided to go further. Not with innuendo this time, but with open provocation. She shifted in her chair, uncrossing her legs with deliberate grace, then sat upright, rigid, composed, every movement calibrated like a stage cue. Her hands folded across her lap first, but then she brought them up and crossed them confidently over her chest as if she were the judge now, not the witness. "I am ready to make my diploma public," she said, each word striking the microphone with icy clarity. "I challenge anyone in this room to take an intelligence test with me. Anyone." Her accent didn't soften the blow it sharpened. It made the dare sound less like a debate and more like a sentence being handed down. Her eyes swept the room, not seeking consensus, but dominance. She was daring someone, daring Jasmine to rise to the bait, to engage her on her terms, spectacle over truth, image over integrity. This wasn't about transparency. It was about public theater, about framing herself as the composed intellectual, and Jasmine as the angry outsider, too emotional, too loud, too unqualified to meet her in a real contest. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't even breathe heavier. Her silence was no longer just silence. It was strategy. And that's when it happened. Behind her, barely noticed at first, her aide stood up with calm precision and turned toward the exit. No rush, no announcement, just deliberate movement. In their hand was a small black case, sleek, rigid, with reinforced corners. The kind of case you don't carry unless what's inside has gravity. A few eyes followed it, a few staffers whispered, but the rest of the room remained frozen between two forces, one flaunting the illusion of proof, the other preparing to break it open. Melania watched it go, but didn't understand. Not yet. And Jasmine didn't offer her the dignity of a warning, because sometimes when someone plays with matches, the wisest thing to do is let them light the fuse. The chamber was still caught in the aftershock of Melania's smug dare, but Jasmine's silence had begun to take on a different shape, less restraint, more orchestration. Like someone playing a long game with the calm of a seasoned surgeon, her hand remained lightly pressed to the desk, her expression unreadable. And then as Melania settled deeper into her self-assured monologue, Jasmine leaned forward not to attack, but to request. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice low but steady, the kind that commands attention without asking for it, "I respectfully request to give my remarks at the end." The chairman hesitated, not out of resistance, but out of anticipation. The atmosphere was changing. He glanced around the room. No objections, just a room bracing for something it couldn't yet define. Finally, he gave a measured nod. "You may." From the Republican flank, the tension cracked with scorn. Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed like a high school bully watching a classmate stall. "She's got nothing," she said with a smirk loud enough for cameras, but just shy of violating decorum. Lauren Boebert chuckled under her breath. The performance was meant to humiliate, but their laughter was built on sand. As Melania continued, her voice smooth again, shifting into talking points about emotional intelligence and women who elevate the discourse, the back door of the hearing room creaked open. No grand announcement, no disruption. Just the return of two of Jasmine's aides moving with precision. One carried the same black hard-shell case from earlier, now unlocked. The other clutched an international courier sleeve fresh with creases and an embossed emblem, the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Slovenia. The packet inside was thick, but at the top, beneath a plastic sleeve, was a document labeled in both Slovene and English verified student record, academic registration, examination history, and authorized proxy signatures. The seal shimmered under the LED lighting, unmistakable, irrefutable. These were not mere allegations. These were state-certified records. And for the first time, a new name appeared in bold print: Martina Horvat, Melania's former roommate, her quiet shadow from the early 90s. Not a pundit, not a rival, a witness. The evidence hadn't just arrived, it had been summoned. Quietly, legally, strategically, and Jasmine hadn't said a word. Not yet, because justice doesn't knock, it enters. For nearly an hour, that white envelope had remained untouched, its silence both haunting and calculated. It had sat like a loaded chamber on the desk in front of Jasmine Crockett, daring anyone to ask what was inside. And now, with the Slovenian ministry's seal confirmed and Martina Horvat's name echoing like a name long buried but never erased, the moment had arrived. Jasmine moved, not rushed, not hesitant, but with the cold certainty of someone who had waited her turn while others underestimated her. Her hand broke the seal with quiet precision, and the sound of paper sliding free felt louder than Melania's earlier insults. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't perform. She simply read. This is an official letter of verification from the University of Ljubljana. She said the words crisp, measured, unshakable. Melania Naus has never completed the undergraduate degree program. No final exam scores. No thesis submitted. The impact was instantaneous. The words didn't just hang in the air, they landed with weight. They rewrote the narrative in real time. The cameras, once focused on facial glamour and performative dignity, now zoomed in on pages of black and white truth. Jasmine didn't stop. She flipped to the next page without missing a breath. Sworn affidavit dated and notarized by Martina Horvat. Her voice sharpened slightly the way a scalpel glints before it cuts. I was the person who took Melania's comprehensive exam in 1992 on her behalf. I was paid $400 and promised full tuition sponsorship for the following academic year. The admission shattered the illusion of authenticity. Melania had cloaked herself in an illusion she weaponized moments earlier when she invoked IQ and academic honor. Whispers bloomed like smoke across the hearing room, but Jasmine's voice cut through them with relentless clarity. I also wrote 3 of her final essays. She did not possess the academic-level English required to complete them herself. And with that final line, the mask cracked, visibly. Melania did not respond. She didn't lunge to interrupt or deny. But something shifted. Her lips pursed tighter. A faint crease deepened between her brows. She blinked slowly, calculating, but the steel in her posture softened just enough for those watching closely to sense that she had been hit somewhere real. She had mocked intelligence, taunted authenticity, thrown down a challenge no one expected Jasmine to meet. And Jasmine hadn't countered with volume or rage. She countered with facts, quiet, lethal, undeniable. The foundation of Melania's myth was buckling not from fury, but from documentation. And there wasn't a soul in the room who could unhear what had just been read aloud. The video didn't begin with fanfare. There was no music, no splash screen, no dramatic lighting, just a slow fade into a quiet room, a modest living space somewhere in rural Austria. The colors were soft, the air still. A bookshelf sat in the background with academic journals and yellowed photographs tucked between volumes. It was intimate, almost disarming. But what drew every eye, both in the chamber and on the broadcast, was the woman seated in the center of the frame. Her name appeared in clean white letters at the bottom: Martina Horvat, former roommate of Melania Knaus, 1990-1992. She looked directly into the camera. Her hair was silver now, pulled into a bun. her posture upright, no makeup, no media polish, just eyes that had seen too much for too long and lips pressed into a line that trembled slightly before parting. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly. I have been silent for 30 years. The sentence dropped like a stone into water, rippling outward in every direction. Behind Jasmine, the screen expanded to full brightness, and the lights in the room dimmed slightly, shifting the emotional weight of the entire chamber toward the glowing confession above. Martina didn't blink. Her voice wasn't rehearsed, but it wasn't unsure either. It was the kind of voice that came not from media training, but from the resolve of someone carrying the burden of truth far too long. But when I saw her using a fake degree to hand out scholarships and calling other women low IQ, I couldn't take it anymore. Even before she continued, the shift in the room was seismic. The very words Melania had used arrogantly, surgically to diminish others had become the match that lit the fuse under her own narrative. Martina's voice didn't waver. She wasn't out for revenge. She was delivering correction. And her choice to do it through video, not in person, added another layer of emotional gravity. This wasn't political theater. It was a confession of conscience. Martina reached beside her and picked up two documents, holding them delicately like artifacts from a time no one had dared examine until now. One document was visibly aged, the cream-colored paper slightly curled at the corners, its red seal faded but intact. The other, bright white and laminated, bore the name Melania across the top in bold serif font. She held them up side by side, letting the camera absorb the contrast. "This is my real diploma," she said softly, her fingers resting on the older one. "And this, what Melania Trump showed the world in 2017, is fake. I can prove it." She didn't say it with malice. She said it like a surgeon describing an X-ray. Her hands moved as the camera zoomed in. She pointed to the serial numbers in the lower right-hand corners. "Here," she said, tapping gently. "This number follows the Slovenian University registry sequence. You can verify it against national archives. But this one," her finger moved to Melania's diploma, "this number does not match any format used before or after 1994. Next, she indicated the official university seal. On her own diploma, the embossed stamp was pressed directly into the paper, a slight indentation, visible even in low resolution. On Melania's, however, the seal was printed on the surface, flat, glossy, reflective. That embossing tool was changed in 1995, she explained, eyes still locked on the camera. Melania claims this diploma was issued in 1992, but this type of seal didn't exist until years later. The room in Washington was silent. You could hear the click of a single pen from the back of the press row. Melania, seated motionless at the hearing table, made no move to defend herself. Her hands rested perfectly still in her lap, but her jaw had tightened. Her face, crafted so carefully in every public appearance, was losing its mask. And it wasn't because someone shouted at her. It was because the truth had entered the room dressed in humility and armed with documentation. Martina wasn't done. She placed both diplomas down and picked up one final sheet, thinner, more worn, handwritten in parts. "This," she said, "is the original letter I received confirming my scholarship approval in exchange for helping Melania during our final exams." She paused, letting the paper settle in her hand, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. She couldn't finish her coursework. Her English was not academic level. She was beautiful, yes, charismatic, but she didn't write those essays. I did. And when I saw her mock others for their intelligence, I realized I had helped create a lie. In that moment, it was no longer about party lines, no longer about committee hearings or culture wars. It was about a woman whose silence had been weaponized, finally reclaiming her voice, not to harm, but to stop harm from continuing. In the front row, a young intern, no older than 23, blinked hard and lowered her eyes. Somewhere in the back, a congressional aide folded her arms, lips pressed tightly together. There was no outrage in the room, just the heavy, crushing weight of exposure. Jasmine Crockett never interrupted. She never nodded, never clapped, never gestured for effect. She simply sat still, composed, as the screen behind her delivered a truth far heavier than any speech could. Because sometimes the loudest blow to power is one spoken gently by someone who once believed in you and can no longer stay quiet. The air still trembled from the weight of Martina Horvat's testimony, but Jasmine Crockett did not let the silence settle. She knew this wasn't just about exposing a fraudulent diploma. It was about revealing a pattern, a system, a theft. One that didn't just insult the truth, but erased real lives, real futures, and real women. Jasmine lowered the first folder with care and, without missing a breath, reached for another slimmer older, its paper edges frayed like forgotten history. She looked straight ahead, her tone dropping sharper now, not in fury but in justice. Let the record reflect, she began, her voice slicing through the stillness like a blade wrapped in velvet, that for every fake honor awarded, there was a real girl denied. She opened the folder, revealing an aged application, a letter of rejection, and a typewritten resume. At the top of the documents was a name that until this moment had lived only in the shadows of a foundation's archive: Elise Harmon. Jasmine turned the first page toward the committee, the cameras, and the world. Elise Harmon was a black high school senior from Illinois, GPA 4.3, president of her school's STEM club, winner of 3 national design competitions. She was nominated in 1996 for the Trump Foundation Design Scholarship, created to support young women entering the fields of fashion architecture and industrial design. The weight of her words hovered like a storm cloud. Elise wasn't just qualified, she was exceptional. Jasmine continued, flipping to the second page with calm precision. She was one of 3 finalists. Her interview was praised, her portfolio reviewed by professionals and given the highest scores, but she was removed from the final selection round. Jasmine looked up. Her voice was steady cold, almost like it had been practiced over the pain. The reason cited: adjustment in candidate criteria. She let that phrase sit in the room. Then she turned over a glossy printout. A news photo, 1996. Melania, now draped in a champagne-colored gown, smiling beside Donald Trump at a gala in Manhattan. The caption: Trump's new muse Melania steps into the spotlight. That same week, Jasmine said the scholarship was awarded to Melania Naus. No academic background in design, no GPA on record, no application on file, but a face already circulating through New York's elite press. She was not chosen for her intellect, she was chosen because she was with him. A ripple of discomfort spread across the hearing chamber. Jasmine didn't flinch. She placed the final page in full view, a leaked memo time-stamped and sourced from a former foundation staffer. The typewritten note was brief but devastating. Elise is too strong, too black, not suitable for our media image. Jasmine read it aloud, not slowly, not dramatically, just plainly. The way someone reads a coroner's report, no need to embellish when the evidence is already deadening. The silence was now suffocating. You could feel the breath tighten in every throat, feel the blood retreat from the faces of those who had cheered earlier. The banner behind Melania, "Empower Her Foundation," looked grotesque now, like a billboard advertising hope funded by stolen opportunity. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She simply looked back to the panel and said almost quietly, but with enough clarity to ring through eternity, she was denied her future, so someone else could pose for the camera. And with that, Elise Harmon, erased for nearly 3 decades, had finally been seen. Not as a statistic, not as a forgotten name in a file, but as the rightful recipient of a dream handed to someone else for no other reason than her skin being too dark, her ambition too loud, and her excellence too threatening to the polished fiction America wanted to photograph. The screen didn't flash. It faded. From the sterile silence of paperwork and hearings into the quiet intimacy of a living room, dimly lit by soft afternoon light. A young girl sat still in front of a beige wall, lined with school art projects, some faded, some framed. Her posture was upright, but her expression betrayed the storm she was holding back. Her eyes, swollen and pink at the corners, shimmered with the threat of fresh tears. Beneath her, the caption read, "Maya Harmon, daughter of Elise Harmon." And though her name had never made headlines in the next few seconds, she would silence an entire country. She looked directly into the camera. No media training, no makeup, no rehearsed tone. Only truth, cracked and raw, carried in the small, trembling voice of a child who had watched her mother suffer quietly for years. "My mom taught art at a public school." She paused, like every word was a weight too large for her chest. "She always told me that maybe she just wasn't good enough, that someone else deserved that scholarship more. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. The background of the frame showed a bookshelf, a clay sculpture, and a school photo of Elise Harmon beaming in a staff hallway. Maya glanced downward, swallowed hard, then looked back up with a calm that defied her age. But now I know that's not true. Another pause. Her throat tightened, but the sentence came through like lightning beneath fog. She wasn't beaten, she was robbed. That last word echoed in the hearing room like a gunshot in a cathedral. Robbed. Not denied. Not outperformed. Robbed. The audacity of the system didn't just cost Elise an opportunity, it convinced her for decades that she was the problem, that she lacked something, that her skin, her strength, her voice made her unworthy of success. And now her daughter, barely old enough to vote, was left to deliver the truth her mother had swallowed for 30 years. The camera lingered on Maya's face. She blinked, but no tears fell. Her eyes burned too hot for that now. The clip ended there. No music, no fade to black. Just stillness. Stillness thick enough to drown in. Back in the chamber, no one moved. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence did more than any accusation could. Chairs creaked slightly. A page flipped nervously. One senator cleared his throat only to stay quiet. The fluorescent light suddenly seemed too harsh, too exposed. And then subtle but unmistakable had happened. Melania Trump lowered her head. Not dramatically, not performatively, but slowly like a statue finally bowing under the weight of its own shadow. Her fingers tightened over her lap, the veins on the back of her hands, faintly visible beneath flawless skin. Her eyes no longer scanned the room. They stayed fixed on the desk, unmoving, unblinking. Her back, once ramrod straight, softened shoulders, pulled slightly inward as if trying to fold herself away from the gaze of the room. And the truth on that screen. Because there are moments when defenses crack without a sound. When a fortress built from image power and polish shatters not under pressure, but under the gentlest blow, a daughter barely holding herself together, speaking softly on behalf of a mother the world refused to see. And in that moment, all the laughter from earlier, those smirks from Green and Bobert, the smug glances passed during Melania's jabs were gone. Because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be spoken once without flinching. And Maya Harmon had just done that for her mother, for every unseen girl who was told to wait her turn, and for every woman who was never allowed to take the stage. Continuing directly from the emotional weight of Maya Harmon's video, the room remained still haunted but demanding clarity. Now came the cold edge of truth, verifiable, technical, indisputable. Jasmine gave a single nod, and a man in a tailored gray suit and wireframe glasses approached the front. Dr. Benjamin Reed, senior archivist and professor of historical document authentication, didn't need theatrics. He brought science and with it finality. The projector screen blinked alive once more, now displaying a high-resolution scan of the university transcript Melania Trump had claimed as her academic record. Dr. Reed didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Precision did all the speaking. Let's start with the font, he said, using a laser pointer to highlight the heading at the top of the page. This is Cambria, designed and released by Microsoft in 2005. He looked around the room deadpan. This transcript is dated 1992. A low stir passed through the chamber. A few eyes squinted upward, some heads tilted in confusion, others in recognition of the clear anachronism. He clicked to the next slide. Now the university seal, he continued. The projection zoomed in on a slightly pixelated emblem in the bottom corner. This is not an official imprint. It's not embossed, not stamped, not printed using archival ink. This is a copy-pasted image file identical to one pulled directly from Wikipedia's English page for the University of Ljubljana. He allowed the words to settle. Jasmine remained stone-faced, watching the jury of public opinion tighten its focus. Dr. Reed advanced the next slide metadata from the file. According to embedded file data, this emblem image was downloaded in 2016, meaning this 1992 transcript uses an image that didn't exist in this form at the time. He looked at no one in particular, but the weight was evenly distributed across the room. For reference, official academic seals from that period are typically embossed directly into the paper. Raised texture, physical authenticity. This one, he tapped the pointer. This is digital wallpaper. A hush spread once more, but this time heavier. Denial had no place here, only timestamps and typos. But Dr. Reed wasn't finished. He flipped to the final slide, two signature boxes side by side. On the left, a signature labeled Rector Ivan Vukovic. On the right, confirmed examples from the Slovenian National Archive. This is the signature listed on Melania Trump's transcript, he said, pointing to the left. However, no such individual ever held the position of rector between 1988 and 1995. The second image was crisp, drawn with broad, confident strokes. This belongs to the real rector, at the time Miroslav Povšić. You'll note the stylistic differences, the M curvature, the downward pressure points and ink splatter patterns. He clicked to an overlay tool showing the two signatures in different colors. There was no overlap. The signature on Ms. Trump's document is not a stylized variation. It's not even a forgery. It's fiction. It was made up. The pause that followed was not theatrical. It was clinical, like a doctor delivering the final diagnosis after months of denial. Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't move. She simply let the air tighten. Dr. Reed closed his folder with a gentle thud. He looked once toward the committee, not with judgment, but with the calm of final evidence. A font can't be used before it's officially released. An image copied from the internet doesn't substitute for a real institutional seal. And a signature that doesn't match any official record is simply not valid. He raised his eyes calmly. When every core component of a document fails verification, there's no reason left to trust the document itself. Melania sat motionless, not a flinch. But for the first time since she'd taken the chair, her eyes no longer searched for support or defiance. They stared forward, hollow, as if trying to find footing where none remained. And above her, silent, static, and damning, the screen still showed the false seal. The image hadn't vanished, but the illusion had. The silence left behind by Dr. Reed's forensic dissection was not just stillness, it was judgment, cold, silent, and final. The chamber didn't move, didn't whisper, didn't even blink. What had begun as a celebration of influence had collapsed into a reckoning of illusion. The seal was fake. The font was too modern. The signature didn't exist. And now there was nothing left for Jasmine to prove except herself. She didn't shift in her chair. She didn't clear her throat. She simply sat forward, letting the sound of her voice break through the heavy air like a razor drawn across velvet. Calm, controlled, but carrying the weight of 1,000 locked doors that she and women like her had kicked open just to sit at that table. You called me low IQ. The words didn't explode, they landed. Each one steady, measured, but cut with precision. The insult was still fresh, still alive in the air, but Jasmine didn't flinch from it. She met it head-on, eyes locked on Melania, who now sat like a statue under lights no longer designed to flatter. But I never paid someone to take my exams. She didn't gesture. She didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken. Transcripts from Slovenia sealed testimony, a professor's voice that dissected forgery like pathology. Jasmine was only connecting the final dot, the one that made this moment not just about fraud, but about dignity. I never needed a rich boyfriend to be noticed. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. A blade polished by years of restraint. There was no trace of performance in her voice, no grandstanding, no theatrics. Just truth spoken by someone who had earned every inch of ground she stood on, without shortcuts, without protection, without privilege. All I ever needed were real papers, real grades, and the truth. That last word, truth, didn't echo, but it reverberated in every set of lungs in the room. No applause followed it, no gasp, just a profound stillness, the kind that came not from fear, but from recognition. Recognition that something irreversible had just happened, not loud but absolute. Across the room, a camera panned slowly to Melania. The control room knew the shot it needed, and it got it. Her face was washed out under the congressional lighting, the glamour stripped clean. She looked not furious, not indignant, but cornered. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by the dull pallor of exposure. The camera zoomed closer, capturing the tiniest movements, a subtle clench in her jaw. The blink she held too long, the silence that could no longer protect her. She didn't reply, because there was no rebuttal, no media-trained line, no consultant's whisper. The lie wasn't just out, it had been unraveled frame by frame, fact by fact, and now finally woman to woman. Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need the crowd. Her dignity was her defense. Her record was her answer. And Melania, once the unshakable icon framed by brand and money, sat small in her chair for the first time. It was not humiliation by volume. It was defeat by truth. And the room knew it. Everyone knew it, especially her. The air had stopped moving. Jasmine Crockett stood now, not because she had to, but because the weight of truth demanded it. Her fingers didn't tremble as they reached for the final folder, a thin cream dossier with just 2 pages inside. No fancy exhibits, no forensic analysis, just ink paper and a broken promise. She opened it slowly, deliberately, and held the first page in her hand, like a fragile photograph from a life that never got its chance. Her eyes didn't scan it. She already knew every word. But the room didn't, and they were going to hear it. Her voice came quiet, but so exact, it silenced even the shallow breathing in the rows behind her. This is from Elise Harmon's scholarship letter dated March 3, 1996, handwritten. She paused. The air tightened again. The lights seemed harsher. I want to study design so I can build schools that are beautiful and bright. I want little black girls to feel proud when they walk in the door. I want them to know they belong there. Jasmine stopped reading. Her voice had stayed strong, but her throat burned. Not from tears, but from restraint. From decades of swallowing injustice papered over by exceptional cases and revised criteria. She lowered the page slightly and looked straight across the chamber, through the arc of history, through the expensive gowns, through every fake seal and televised smile into the eyes of Melania Trump. The First Lady who was never elected, never graduated, never tested, but who now sat beneath a foundation logo about empowering girls. Jasmine didn't blink. You took Elise's spot so you could be on television. The words didn't rise, they dropped like stone slabs. Solid, unmovable. Accusation not as emotion, but as proof. And then you stood here and called women like me low IQ. A collective exhale passed through the gallery. Not loud, not gasping, just the sound of shame waking up in human form. A few committee members shifted. Even Boebert leaned back. Melania didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't flinch. But her hands, delicately folded earlier, were now clenched so tight her knuckles had turned chalk white. Jasmine still hadn't raised her voice, but she didn't need to. She wasn't arguing anymore. She was indicting. Her fingers tapped once on the page before her. Elise had a 4.3 GPA. She had awards faculty recommendations, perfect attendance. And she had one dream build spaces that little black girls felt were made for them. She walked to the end of the table, closer to the screen that had once shown Martina Horvat's confession, closer to the place where truth had already unraveled every defense. Instead, that scholarship went to you. Jasmine said this not with fury, but with historical precision, to someone who failed their final exam, who didn't submit a portfolio, who in 1996 wasn't even attending classes, just dating a billionaire on red carpets. No one interrupted, not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the live feed cameras had stopped adjusting focus. They were locked. The nation was locked. She held up the second page, a printed internal memo. Jasmine didn't read it aloud, yet she let the audience see it. On the top corner, Trump Foundation, seal, 1996. On the bottom, a typed note in grayscale ink. She finally spoke it aloud. Elise is overly assertive, too visibly African-American. Not a match for brand messaging. The words didn't echo, they infected the room, like poison rediscovered after decades underground. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't look triumphant. She looked like a woman pulling nails from the coffin of someone else's stolen future. That's how this started. Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied again. Not with transcripts or TV interviews, but with a little girl who wanted to redesign public schools and was told she wasn't photogenic enough to deserve that chance. Her hand dropped the page onto the table. Not thrown, just placed, like the final card in a hand already won. She turned again to Melania, the same woman who had once sauntered into this room, with cameras trailing her like royalty, who had delivered veiled barbs with velvet diction and flashed a smile after saying low IQ. That smile was gone. Her mouth was pressed into a flat line. Her mascara subtly smudged her eyes fixed on something behind Jasmine, anywhere but her. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not with the words, not with the reckoning. You didn't just lie on your resume. She took a single step forward, her voice firm but low. You took a scholarship from a black woman who earned it, and then you came here and insulted the rest of us. Another step. You weaponized your proximity to power, then mocked those who climb without it. The screen behind her flashed again, the image of Elise's handwritten application, her teenage cursive full of hope and hunger. In the lower right corner, a doodle of a school with flowers out front. Jasmine gestured back to it barely. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't angry. She was ready. And you erased her. Now the camera turned to the committee dais. A few jaws had gone tight. Even the chairman's gavel remained untouched, as if the weight of what had been revealed suspended the rules of order. Jasmine's tone softened, but didn't retreat. So no, Mrs. Trump. I didn't have a rich man open doors for me. I didn't ask anyone to take my exams. I didn't fake my way into rooms and then laugh at those I displaced. I walked through the front door with real credentials, real work, and the truth. She took a final pause. Then, with the quiet force of a history teacher laying down the last page of a long-lost textbook, she added, "That's what low IQ looks like to you. But to people like Elise, it looks like justice." Melania lowered her eyes, and for the first time since the hearing began, she had no reply. Not because she wasn't allowed to speak, but because there was finally nothing left she could say. The silence was not quiet, it was thunder held inside lungs that no one dared to empty. For several seconds, the hearing room existed without motion. Not even the buzzing of fluorescent lights or the shuffle of pages interrupted the stillness. Jasmine Crockett stood alone in that silence, not as a politician, not as a witness, but as something more elemental the voice history forgot to amplify. Melania Trump sat frozen behind her polished mask, stripped of every fabricated credential, every media fluff narrative. She had no teleprompter now, no soft lighting, no carefully phrased press release, just the truth staring her down in real time. And Jasmine wasn't finished. She reached below the desk and pulled out a small worn plaque, wooden, slightly chipped at the edge, no larger than a clipboard. But etched into its center in bold serif type was something older than any title or throne. Article 1, Section 6. Jasmine held it up not like a prop, but like scripture. Her voice was clear, grounded, and louder than any insult thrown her way. I don't need permission to speak the truth. She paused, scanning the room as if daring anyone to argue. I have the right to speak. It wasn't just a reference to the Constitution, it was a reclaiming. A statement that she stood on firmer ground than any manufactured narrative, any ghost-written memoir, any honorary degree mailed from a press office. This was law. This was earned. And this was now. She lowered the plaque gently, almost ceremoniously, as if returning it to the ark from which it came. Then she stepped forward past the microphones, past the committee desk, past the invisible line where political theater usually ends and moral courage begins. Her eyes locked on the camera, the same camera that had broadcast Melania's smirk an hour ago, the same camera that once cut away when women of color were speaking. This time it didn't move, it focused. And Jasmine delivered a message not just to the room, but to every living room, classroom, and courtroom watching. I will never bow to a fake diploma. Her voice didn't waver. It surged like a levee finally broken, not by rage, but by restraint that could no longer hold. And if telling the truth makes me low IQ in the eyes of power, she paused not for drama, but for accuracy. The words mattered. Every syllable would be dissected, quoted, memed, politicized. She knew that. She embraced it. Then I accept that title with honor. The sentence landed like a verdict, not just on Melania, but on every panel that ever chose marketable over qualified, on every scholarship rejected quietly, every resume ignored silently, every voice silenced politely. Jasmine's declaration wasn't just personal, it was generational. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. This wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. She stood there breathing evenly while her words echoed across the marble walls and into the homes of people who had been waiting for anyone to say it out loud. That truth was not a privilege to be granted. It was a right to be exercised. That dignity wasn't something power bestowed. It was something no one had the authority to take. And in that moment, every barrier cracked. The cameras had stopped scanning for reactions. They stayed fixed. Melania's posture, once regal and rehearsed, had deflated. Her hands clutched the edge of the table like it might save her. Her mouth twitched as if searching for a line she hadn't been coached on. But the moment was no longer hers. It belonged to Jasmine. And Jasmine was immovable. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She didn't deliver a final blow. Because she didn't need to. The power of that last sentence, "Then I accept that title with honor," had already turned the hearing from spectacle to scripture. A truth carved into the story of every young woman who'd ever been told she wasn't the right fit. Every girl told to lower her voice, every resume tossed because the name sounded too ethnic, every test taken twice because the first time didn't seem credible. Jasmine stood for all of them, and by standing, she made sure the world could no longer sit comfortably in silence. Then without fanfare, without waiting for a signal, she stepped back to her seat, leaving the camera. The committee and Melania Trump suspended in the weight of a single irreversible truth: real paper, real grades, and the truth. That was always enough. And now it was finally undeniable. The stillness that followed Jasmine's final words wasn't quiet, it was spiritual. Not one senator touched their microphone. Not one aide leaned in with a whisper, and not even the most hardened political strategist in the room could pretend the air hadn't shifted. Something had just happened, something that couldn't be spun or sanitized. You didn't have to agree with her politics to feel it. You just had to be human. The camera lights dimmed slightly as the hearing clock ticked forward, but no one gave the signal to adjourn. Not yet. It was as if history itself demanded one last breath before it moved on. And in that pause, a question formed, not spoken aloud, but churning in every mind. How many other scholarships were stolen quietly? How many women had been branded too bold, too loud, too different, while someone else smiled and collected the reward for playing soft and silent? No one could answer. Because the real scandal wasn't just a forged diploma. It wasn't even the hypocrisy of using a fraudulent past to build a philanthropic future. It was the system so elegant in its cruelty that had allowed it all to happen without resistance for decades. And Jasmine had just pierced it. Across the room, Elise Harmon's original scholarship letter still sat on the desk, trembling slightly from the soft breeze of an air vent above. Its language was so gentle, so hopeful. "We regret to inform you. We thank you for your courage. We encourage you to apply again." But now in this context, the words read like a knife wrapped in silk. They weren't regretful, they were surgical. They had removed Elise without a scar, without noise, without justice. That was the lesson. Not every injustice screams. Some whisper, some wear high heels and smile for the cameras. Some passes grace, and it wasn't just Elise. It wasn't just Jasmine. It was the millions watching from behind cracked phone screens and second jobs and student debt, nodding slowly, because they knew that feeling of being qualified but never quite allowed in. A young intern in the back wiped her eyes quietly and turned away before anyone noticed. She wasn't crying for Jasmine. She was crying because something inside her had just been named. And once something has a name, you can't unsee it. Melania still hadn't moved. Her team sat paralyzed, stunned not by the loss of narrative control, but by something worse, the knowledge that people were no longer afraid to say what they saw. Her silence, once weaponized as elegance, now looked like surrender. The First Lady of Image had nothing left to curate, and then something unexpected. Chairwoman Dawson, a Republican from Maine, known for avoiding spectacle, leaned into her mic with slow reverence. "Let the record show," she said, her voice more solemn than procedural, "that Representative Crockett exercised her right under Article 1, Section 6, with clarity, courage, and evidence." That was it. Just a line in the transcript. But it mattered. Because in a town that measures truth in sound bites and sacrifices it for civility, an official acknowledgement was as rare as thunder in a courtroom. The gavel didn't fall. No grand applause erupted. But for the first time in years, a lie had been unraveled in full view, and no one dared interrupt the stitching. The lesson wasn't written in law. It wasn't posted on campaign posters or printed in glossy brochures. It lived in the space between Jasmine's sentence and Melania's silence. Truth has no sponsors. Integrity doesn't need a spotlight. That's why it shakes foundations. At the far end of the chamber, a young black girl who had been watching from the public gallery, the daughter of a community college janitor, wearing her mother's heels 2 sizes too big, leaned forward and whispered to herself, "That's what power really looks like." No one heard her, but her future did, and it tilted. Because when a woman like Jasmine refuses to flinch, she doesn't just win a debate, she breaks the cycle. She reaches backward through time and touches the shoulder of every woman who was told to stay in line. And she reaches forward, planting something fierce in those not yet born. What Elise Harmon lost wasn't just a scholarship. It was a place at the table of potential. But what Jasmine reclaimed was more than that. It was the language of worth. Not the kind etched on plaques or forged on PDFs. The kind that pulses in the veins of every girl who was told she was too much, too black, too bold, too smart, too poor. And in that hearing room filled with oak desks and trembling egos, Jasmine did not ask for acceptance. She did not ask for dignity. She declared it. That was the most dangerous act of all. A woman who doesn't need to be given power cannot be stripped of it. As the minutes passed, journalists filed out quietly, not because the story was over, but because it had just become too large for any single headline. What would they write? Crockett embarrasses? Melania forgery scandal explodes in Senate. No, none of it would capture what really happened. Because this wasn't a scandal. It was an unmasking. A lie perfectly tailored had finally met a woman who didn't blink. A system built to reward silence had finally been spoken back to. And now even those who hated Jasmine had to admit one thing: they had underestimated her. Again. She didn't just expose Melania's degree. She exposed the idea that credentials equal intelligence, that beauty equals virtue, that money equals merit. She put the entire myth on trial and let the evidence speak. No fireworks, no tantrums, just a finger on a sealed envelope and the audacity to tell the truth in public. And for once, truth won, not because it was louder, but because it was undeniable. The lesson didn't need banners or slogans. It didn't need a march or a movement. It needed one woman to say, "I don't need a rich man's name to matter. I need the truth." And when she did, everything changed. Not because the world turned, but because she didn't. The weight of silence was broken not by applause, but by awakening. Jasmine Crockett's words still lingered in the air, like gunpowder, unignorable, undeniable. And as the room exhaled, something else ignited responsibility. Not just political, not just academic, moral, civic, human. Because a lie that lasted 3 decades had finally collapsed, but not by accident. It took a woman who refused to blink. It took evidence, resilience, and fire. And if it took that much to expose one fake diploma, how many more lies still wear makeup and pearls smiling from podiums while stealing opportunity with a velvet glove? That's not a question for Washington anymore. That's a question for us. For every parent who's been told their child isn't a good fit for a scholarship. For every teacher who watched their most gifted student turned away for being too passionate, too outspoken, too unpolished. For every HR director who's seen resumes tossed aside because the names weren't easy to pronounce. For every woman who's ever had to smile while being diminished. The story you just witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was a mirror, and you're standing in front of it now. So what are you going to do? You could look away. You could say, "That's just politics." But that would be a lie too. Because what happened in that chamber happens in offices, in classrooms, in job interviews, in casting calls, in hospitals, in bank loans, in college admissions, and in 1,000 other quiet rooms every single day. The names change. The titles change. But the system doesn't unless we make it. Jasmine didn't just confront Melania. She confronted an entire architecture of polite exclusion. She took a wrecking ball of truth and swung it against the marble facade of legacy privilege and myth. And the cracks are still spreading. But here's the thing about cracks: they can become doors if we push. So push. If you're an educator, audit your scholarship pipelines. Who's getting them? Who's not? Are you rewarding polish over passion, familiarity over brilliance? If you run an institution, stop selecting for comfort. Start selecting for courage, integrity, and lived excellence, not just polished presentations and proximity to power. If you're in media, stop telling sanitized success stories that pretend merit floats to the top untouched. Tell the messy truths. Lift the names that were buried. Document the Elise Harmons before they disappear into footnotes. If you're a student, especially if you're a black girl being told you're too loud, too much, too ambitious, don't shrink. Don't let someone with fake credentials and perfect lighting define your value. You don't owe anyone softness. You owe yourself the truth. And if you're watching all this thinking, that's terrible, but I don't know what to do, then start here. Believe women like Jasmine. Listen. Amplify. Question who we call brilliant and why. It's not enough to cheer when the underdog wins. That's not justice. That's just a feel-good ending. Justice is when the system that made them an underdog collapses. And that takes more than a headline. It takes you. Remember the phrase Jasmine spoke, "I don't need a rich man's name to matter. I need the truth." That wasn't just defiance. That was a blueprint. You don't need elite schools to speak truth. You don't need connections to demand fairness. You don't need permission to say, "This isn't right and I won't be silent about it." You just need to act. Support real transparency laws for educational institutions. Push for background checks on donor-sponsored scholarship foundations. Demand that private money doesn't decide public futures. And when someone in power belittles your intelligence because of how you look, how you sound, or where you came from, don't fight for their respect. Fight for the next girl watching. Because she's watching. She always is. She watched when Elise was pushed out of the scholarship her GPA earned. She watched when Elise's daughter cried on camera holding nothing but regret and dignity. She watched when Melania used a counterfeit life to crown herself a role model. She watched when no one stopped it. And she watched finally when Jasmine Crockett stood up unshaken and said, "Then I accept that title with honor." What do you think that girl learned? That truth can still win. That dignity doesn't need validation. That a sealed envelope and a steady voice can take down a machine built on lies. But that truth won't win by itself next time. It needs help. It needs structure. It needs you. This isn't about Democrat or Republican. It's about a nation where intelligence is measured in whiteness and success is measured in who your husband is. It's about the myth that grace looks like silence and ambition looks like arrogance. And we're done with those lies. So the next time someone tells you, be grateful for what you're given, remember Elise Harmon. She wasn't given anything, but she was never less than brilliant. The next time someone tells you to stay in your lane, remember Jasmine Crockett. Her lane led straight to the truth, and she didn't slow down for anyone's comfort. And the next time someone hands you a glossy pamphlet of polished lies, smile and ask for the real transcript. Because truth is messy, justice is loud, and change is uncomfortable. But it's necessary, and it's overdue. So let this not be a story that ends in applause. Let it be a beginning, a recalibration, a challenge. Let it force you to ask, whose brilliance have I ignored? Whose story have I believed without evidence? What structures am I upholding just because they look professional? And let your answer be action. Share this story. Teach it. Question everything that's sold to you as grace if it comes without honesty. Praise those who earn their place without shortcuts. And the next time you hear someone mock a woman as low IQ, don't laugh. Ask them what they're afraid of. Because in the end, this was never about Jasmine versus Melania. This was about what we accept as truth and what we're willing to do when the truth finally stands up, holds a constitution in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other, and says, I didn't come to be polite. I came to be accurate. And she was. Now it's our turn. But here's the harder truth. Moments like this aren't meant to stay in the chamber. They aren't meant to be clipped into memes or consumed as entertainment. They're meant to ripple. They're meant to echo. They're meant to arm us, because power doesn't only live in marble halls or gold banners. It lives in the stories we choose to believe and the lies we choose to break apart. Think about the young girl in the back row of her school library watching this hearing on a cracked phone screen. She doesn't care about designer suits or practiced smiles. She cares about whether someone like her can step into the brightest, most hostile spotlight and hold her ground. When Jasmine stayed silent until it mattered, then spoke with precision, sharper than steel, that girl saw a roadmap. She saw possibility. She saw herself. Think about the young man whose scholarship was ripped away because of one cruel headline, or the nurse whose career was destroyed by a smear on television, Or the family who lost their mother because the media's framing convinced them she was guilty before she ever had a chance to speak. For them, this wasn't drama. It was recognition. It was survival. They watched and realized sometimes the frame cracks, sometimes the system blinks, sometimes truth wins. And that is why we cannot let this hearing fade into the archive. We cannot let it become another story we consume and forget. Because the true test of Jasmine's stand is not whether Melania Trump left the room silent, it's whether we leave the room different. Whether we fact-check before we repost, whether we stop repeating insults that were never true, whether we choose to push back against the polished cruelty that hides behind words like professional and grace. Because cruelty wrapped in elegance is still cruelty. A lie told in perfect diction is still a lie. And the systems that reward those lies will keep standing unless we decide to stop holding them up. So what does it look like when we choose differently? It looks like refusing to let someone's worth be decided by a headline. It looks like asking who benefits when a woman is mocked, when her record is erased, when her accomplishments are minimized. It looks like demanding that accuracy matter more than applause. If Jasmine's silence taught us anything, it's that strength isn't always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes strength is restraint. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's the hand resting on an envelope that everyone else is terrified might open. Because silence, when it's purposeful, becomes a weapon sharper than words. And when the words finally come, they land like thunder. So when your moment comes, and it will remember hers, remember how she didn't need to meet cruelty with cruelty. She met it with control. She met it with proof. She met it with truth. And let that be your model. When they tell you you're too loud, remember they're afraid of your clarity. When they say you're too emotional, remember they're afraid of your conviction. When they call you low IQ, remember they're afraid of your evidence. Because the real story here isn't Melania's insult. It's Jasmine's answer. The insult will fade. The answer will remain. And now the torch is in our hands. To carry her clarity into classrooms, workplaces, kitchens, and city halls. To refuse to let another girl grow up believing the lie that her intelligence is measured by silence or that her worth is defined by a room full of cameras. Truth is not fragile. It only looks fragile when it's cut, when it's edited, when it's framed to look small. But when truth is whole, when it's spoken fully, when it stands without apology, it is the most unstoppable force in the world. So take this story with you. Let it sharpen your questions. Let it steady your voice. Let it remind you that accuracy, even when it comes in whispers, is stronger than arrogance shouted into microphones. Because Jasmine didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every woman who's ever been framed, for every child who's ever been mislabeled, for every truth that's ever been cut out of the final edit. And she proved something that should guide us all. The future doesn't belong to those who mock. It belongs to those who refuse to be edited. Thank you for watching until this moment. And for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.